Okay, the next item of business is debate on motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine. I call on Angus Robertson to speak to and move the motion. Around 11 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I move the motion that stands in my name. The Scottish Government has repeatedly called for a ceasefire and the unfettered flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza since the start of this conflict. We've also condemned unreservedly Hamas's brutality in October 2023, including the murder of the Scottish Jew Bernard Cowan, and have called for all hostages to be released. Hamas must have no future in Gaza. We've called upon the United Kingdom to end all arms sales to Israel and ensure accountability for those responsible for war crimes or crimes against humanity. The First Minister has made clear that the Scottish Government shares the concern of other governments and international leaders that genocide appears to be unfolding in Gaza. And we recognise the gravity of such a conclusion. Genocide is the gravest of international crimes. Governments must act when they believe that genocide is happening. As the First Minister set out, the Ministerial Code requires the Scottish Government to follow international law and to meet international treaty obligations. Indeed, it is noteworthy that the Labour amendment today explicitly and specifically recognises the importance of international law to the question of whether support for arms companies can continue. They are right to do so, and as the First Minister set out, it is taking account of international law and the Ministerial Code that we have paused new support. It is, of course, ultimately for international courts to decide if genocide has occurred, but governments cannot wait until it is too late. History has taught us that harsh lesson. The last genocide in Europe took place in Srebrenica in 1995. It took until 2007, 12 years later, to be recognised as a genocide by the International Court of Justice. History will judge all decision-makers about what we have done to react to the facts that we can all see. Doing nothing, prevaricating or seeking to avoid difficult decisions is not an option. The International Court of Justice in January 2024 found a prima facie case that the Israeli government was committing genocide and issued provisional measures. And in May 2024, following the IDF's assault on Rafah, the court issued additional orders to halt military operations which may inflict on the Palestinians in Gaza conditions that could bring about their physical destruction in whole or in part. The alarm has been raised. Evidence is on televisions daily. Over 63,000 people, mostly women and children, have died. Famine has been declared while thousands of truckloads of aid are blocked, and desperate Palestinians risk death trying to access the meagre supplies being distributed under gunfire by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. United Nations leaders have expressed fears of a genocide. Of course.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. Does he recognise, as I do, that the evidence for the continuing outrages perpetrated by the Netanyahu government have prompted former Likud Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to say that Netanyahu's proposals for a humanitarian city in Gaza amount to, or tantamount to, ethnic cleansing?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with the intervention that has been made by Alex Cole-Hamilton. It is one of a number of interventions that point to the facts that we can all see. They are there for all of us to see. The question is whether we act. And the First Minister has today set out the actions that the Scottish Government is taking within our powers, but also what we expect the United Kingdom Government to do, including joining South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. The United Kingdom bears a unique historical responsibility as the former colonial power over a territory which is so bitterly contested. And the First Minister's statement sets out what the Scottish Government can do within our powers. The pause on new support for arms companies linked to genocide is effectively the Scottish Government divesting its investment exactly as the Green Amendment today calls for. It's clear that the vast majority of the actions that amendment calls for, such as sanctions, are out with our powers and are, as the amendment itself notes, for the UK Government. Presiding Officer, the motion we debate today refers simply to the need for the State of Palestine to be recognised. It is, of course, for the United Kingdom to take that decision. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the UK would recognise the State of Palestine at the United Nations General Assembly unless the Israeli Government declared a ceasefire allowed humanitarian access, halted West Bank annexations and showed genuine commitment to peace and a two-state solution. While the Scottish Government welcomed that decision, having repeatedly called upon the United Kingdom to recognise Palestine, we are clear that recognition should not be conditional, but instead a first step towards a two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis live peacefully side by side. Recognition is the right of every Palestinian in the occupied Palestinian territories. Presiding Officer, let's be clear. Netanyahu's government has rejected the United Kingdom's conditions. The Israeli Security Cabinet took the chilling decision to seize Gaza City, home to around 900,000 civilians, where the United Nations has declared that famine conditions exist. Israeli forces have since attacked Gaza City suburbs, killing civilians and ending humanitarian pauses. These actions directly contradict the UK's demands. On the 20th of August 2025, the Israeli government approved the massive E1 settlement project, which would likely make a two-state solution unviable. In his own words, Israeli Minister Bezalel Smotrich said, and I quote, "This reality finally buries the idea of a Palestinian state because there is nothing to recognise and no one to recognise." These chilling words will resonate through the ages. We have been warned. Presiding Officer, the UK, having authored the Balfour Declaration, bears historic responsibility to uphold the principle of equitable rights, something recognition of Palestine unconditionally would help to restore. Palestine is recognised by 147 United Nations member states, is a UN observer and accepted by the ICC as a state entity. So the UK's history imposes a moral duty. The Balfour Declaration's promise of mutual rights cannot be realised without Palestinian statehood. Presiding Officer, this must be the starting position. As well as genocide in Gaza, we see worsening in settler violence in the West Bank. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, over 1,000 settler attacks have been recorded this year alone. On Monday this week, the First Minister and I spoke to the Palestinian head of mission in London, Hussam Zomlot, and he described to the First Minister and myself in heartbreaking terms what he has witnessed recently in the West Bank. He was clear that the Israeli government's aim is to settle the entire West Bank. He described the West Bank's economic strangulation of more than 50% unemployment, of roadblocks, of Palestinian communities penned in behind walls and behind wire. This is his and nearly 3 million Palestinians' home. Can any of us imagine what it must feel like to be systematically removed from your homeland, your homes, your livelihoods destroyed, your children's future stolen, while the international community fails to act decisively? I'd be happy to give way, of course.
Pauline McNeill.
Thank you. Is the Minister familiar with the case of Palestinian Adwa Hathleen, who was shot dead in the West Bank only a few weeks ago? And would he agree that it does look like, under this Netanyahu government, it should become a lawless state, because this man, who we've all seen if you've watched it, shot him dead, and there's not going to be a trial, there's not going to be any kind of accountability. Can we really see now that Israel is a democracy if it does not have a court system?
Cabinet Secretary.
The case that Pauline McNeill raises is shocking. What's perhaps more shocking is it's not isolated. This, unfortunately, two-tier justice or non-existent justice for Palestinians in the occupied territory is but a symptom of the wider challenge. And I acknowledge her long-standing involvement in this issue, and I thank her for raising this particular case, but I'm sure she, like me, shares the view that it is one of many, and they are all totally unacceptable. The First Minister has announced actions that the Scottish Government will take, and what we want the United Kingdom Government to do, which includes following Ireland's example of banning goods produced in illegal settlements and increasing sanctions against those who promote illegal settlements. This wave of settler violence appears to be systematic and escalating, unpunished by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defence Forces. It forces Palestinians off their land, it erases livelihoods, it erases communities and intensifies the humanitarian crisis. There's no time to waste. The UK must act now before it is too late. I joined the First Minister in meeting representatives of Scotland's Jewish community on Monday to make clear the esteem in which they are held and the value we place on the community's contribution to our nation. They must not suffer anti-Semitism because of the actions of Netanyahu's government. Of course.
Jackson Carlo.
Can I thank him for the expression of that sentiment? He will know the extraordinary efforts that have been entered into here in Scotland, not least with the Drumlanrig Accords promoted by Edward Green and Sheikh Saeed Razawi. But he will also know, in response to the meeting he had with the First Minister of the Jewish community, that there are concerns. There are concerns that this will fuel some prejudicial action against the Jewish community here in Scotland, not least parents of Calderwood Lodge in my constituency, Scotland's only Jewish primary school, the world's only Jewish Catholic campus. How will he give effect to that sentiment?
Cabinet Secretary.
So Jackson Carlaw is as committed to his Jewish constituents as much as I am, representing as I do Edinburgh's synagogue, indeed the Central Mosque and the churches of our main Christian denominations. Scotland's Jewish community is a much valued part of our national life, as the First Minister has made clear, but I recognise, as do we all, how difficult things are for the Jewish community because of the hostages that Hamas holds, but also the fears that they have because of charged emotions given appalling situation being meted out to Palestinian people. So I acknowledge the point that he makes, and we all need to be mindful of that. Drawing my contributions to a close, Presiding Officer, the Israeli government's approach to delivering aid via the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has failed tragically. The Israeli authorities must immediately allow humanitarian agencies, including UNRWA, to conduct their life-saving work unimpeded and at scale. Since the conflict began, the Scottish Government has so far committed £1.3 million for Gaza and the wider Middle East, including £750,000 for UNRWA and a further £550,000 to the Disasters Emergency Committee Appeal, Mercy Corps and SCIAF, £250,000 in total in November 2024 and £300,000 total announced on the 22nd of April 2025. The First Minister announced today that the Scottish Government will provide £400,000 in funding to establish the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub in Scotland, match funding significant in-kind contribution from Kids Operating Room, and this funding will unlock funds for a $15 million field hospital ready for deployment in Gaza to provide essential services. The hub, based in Dundee, can also be used to support field hospital deployments in future humanitarian crises, and we will also donate £600,000 to the UNOCHA-led humanitarian fund for the occupied Palestinian territories to provide life-saving health services, supplies and shelter for those most at risk. We've also committed to providing medical support for up to 20 injured children from Gaza and expect the first arrivals along with their families in mid-September. Presiding Officer, we are facing a defining moment in our lifetimes. As the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins, said 1 month ago, we are witnessing, and I quote, the incredible destruction of an entire people. The international community must act, Scotland must act, and the United Kingdom Government's special responsibility places an unenviable but necessary burden to lead that endeavour. I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much. Before calling the next speaker, I just invite members who wish to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call Jackson Carlaw to speak to and move Amendment 18686.3 around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Scottish Conservatives are open to supporting the motion that is before the Parliament today. It's been quite carefully drafted. One can add different interpretations to it. Whether it is to accept all of the content of the Scottish Government or not is a separate matter. We will be listening with care to the way in which the debate is conducted this afternoon, and obviously in relation to any other amendments that might be passed. Presiding Officer, the Chamber is once again debating the Middle East, a region too often characterised by tragedy, and today by the conflict in Gaza. And we remember that we are not speaking in abstract terms, but of human lives, of Israeli families who live under the terror of rocket fire, and of Palestinian families trapped between the cruelty of Hamas and the failure of international institutions to protect them. Every statistic we hear represents men, women and children whose lives have been torn apart, and far too many of those statistics are the lives of men, women and children in Gaza. Let me be absolutely clear in the context of the unfolding of this event that Israel, like any sovereign nation, had the right, indeed the duty, to defend its citizens. Hamas is not a government. It is not a liberation movement. It is, as Anna Sauer, I think, recognised, a terrorist organisation. Its massacre of Israeli civilians, its kidnapping of the innocent, and its relentless rocket fire are not acts of resistance. They're acts of terror. And no responsible state could have sat idly by in the face of such atrocities. And we should also reflect, as I posed in the question to the First Minister, on the language used to describe this conflict. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it was rightly called Putin's invasion of Ukraine. When Iraq was invaded, it was spoken of as Saddam Hussein's war against Kuwait on other people. But when Israel is attacked and forced to respond, it is too often referred to as Israel's war. And rightly or wrongly, that phrase implies, for many, particularly the Jewish community, that an entire people, the Jewish people, are responsible for the decisions of their government. And that's a dangerous double standard. Yes, of course. Well, Maggie Chapman.
Maggie Chapman.
I'm grateful to Jackson Carlo for taking my intervention. He talks about the right of the Israeli state to act. Does he also agree that, given it is an occupying force, it has responsibilities under international law to allow food, to allow aid, to allow other support, to allow daily life to go on in the occupied territories, something that has systematically failed to do, not just for 2 years, but for decades?
Jackson Carlo.
Yes, I agree with, I think, the substance of Ms Chapman's point, and I'll return to it in my own remarks. But Christine Graham, yes.
Christine Graham.
To assure Jackson Carlo, every time I've written very often about this, I have made it plain that Hamas's actions were atrocious and that it is Netanyahu's actions, not the Israeli people, who are at fault. Just to assure you that those of us who are writing about it do make that distinction very loud and clear.
Jackson Carlo.
Unfortunately, that is not necessarily generally and commonly the place. In fact, we talk about Hamas's atrocity in Israel, not Gaza's atrocity in Israel. The parallel there is to be seen. It is not the Jewish people who are responsible for the decisions of their government, and it's a dangerous double standard, one that blurs the line between legitimate criticism of government policy and the prejudice of anti-Semitism that some will exploit. And we just have to be vigilant against that distinction being erased. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his remarks in the speech as he paid tribute to the Jewish community in this country and directly addressed the fears they had. But Hamas's evil doesn't just stop there. It embeds itself among the very civilians it claims to represent. It launched rockets from schools, hiding weapons in hospitals, and stored explosives beneath homes. It's turned the people of Gaza into human shields. The suffering of civilians in Gaza is real, but the moral responsibility is not only that directed at Israel, but first and foremost with Hamas. Some blame Israel for the shortage of aid. I've heard that said, and I think there are arguments that do legitimately need to be explored. But the reality is more complex and more damning of the international system. Israel has opened border crossings. Convoys are ready. Yet food and medicine too often sit idle because the United Nations refuses Israeli escorts to guarantee safe passage from looting. And we know that reports suggest that as much as 88% of aid was intercepted. And what does get through is then often stolen by Hamas, diverted away from the children and families who need it most. Let me be absolute. This is not a shortage just caused by Israel's blockade, but by Hamas's brutality and the inaction of the United Nations. It is the innocent who pay the price. Now, Britain must speak. I think I'm going to have to make some progress, but I will be closing for our side as well, and I will take as many questions as I can at that point, as I have no written remarks prepared. Britain must speak with both clarity and compassion. Yet if we are to speak seriously about peace, we must look beyond Gaza, because Hamas does not act alone. Behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah in Lebanon, behind the Houthis in Yemen, stands the same hand: Tehran. Iran has spent decades arming, funding and directing a network of proxies. It thrives on conflict and instability, exporting chaos to entrench its own dictatorship. Every rocket fired into Israel, every drone launched across borders, bears the fingerprints of the Iranian regime. And that means pressing the United Nations for action there too. It means working with allies to stop Iran's weapons flowing into the region. And it means refusing to let those who seek to delegitimise Israel dominate the narrative. Compassion for the innocent does not weaken our resolve. That's why Britain, Scotland cannot afford to be naive. This is not simply about territory or religion. It's a struggle between a democratic state, with a government with whom people may have issues, seeking peace, and a terror network fuelled by an authoritarian regime that despises peace. If we are serious about stability, we must be serious about countering Iran's malign influence diplomatically, economically, where necessary, alongside our allies. Presiding officer, in this chamber we may differ on emphasis, but we should not differ on the principle. Israel has the right to live free from terror. Palestinians have the right to live free from fear and in peace, and in a state that can be recognised. And Britain has the responsibility to stand always on the side of peace, security and the rule of law. That means solidarity with our allies, it means compassion for civilians caught in the crossfire, and it means confronting those powers that profit from endless war. This conflict should remind us of a simple truth. The values we cherish, democracy, security, the sanctity of human life, are not defended by words alone, but by resolve. And our resolve must be clear. We stand for Israel's right to exist. We stand for peace and a renewal of hope for all the Palestinian people. And we stand against those from Hamas to Tehran who would see both destroyed. That is the moral duty of our nation. That is the path to a future worthy of the peoples of the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Carlow. I now call on Neil Bibby to speak to and to move Amendment 18686.2. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise to move the amendment in my name and to make clear the Government's unamended motion today is also in our name. We support the immediate recognition of the State of Palestine. Today I want to speak of one people, humanity, not two. One set of values, justice, before we talk of two-state solutions. One goal, peace, before we apportion names to crimes in Gaza and the West Bank, where there have been so many, by so many. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is a verse from the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, which is shared by Christian and Jew. It is also a verse in the Quran. It is not, as some might think, an encouragement to violence. It was instead an exhortation to limit it, for retaliation to be proportionate, to end the code of vengeance that called for an eyelash. No one who calls themselves part of humanity can say that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not breached that living text shared in his response to the indefensible atrocities of Hamas. Yes, Israel had the right, the duty to defend itself after Hamas had murdered and kidnapped its children. But the Israeli Prime Minister does not have the right to slaughter. He's turned the clock back rather than build a new future for his nation and his region. And the peace of Israel depends on the peace of Palestine. In response to Jackson Carlow, I believe Netanyahu represents his government, his coalition perhaps, but not the Israeli people. And we almost acknowledge that, particularly in our own communities, where our protests cannot be allowed to sow division. My leader, my friend and Assawars called the recent actions of the Israeli government genocide. I agree. Other colleagues have talked of war crimes. I do not demur. I'll take an intervention from Mr Youssef.
Hamza Youssef.
Neil Bibby for his contribution so far. And just on that very point, I also welcomed Anna Sarwar's statement that a genocide is taking place. David Lammy called it a moral outrage. Keir Starmer called it horrifying. Assuming that Neil Bibby agrees with his colleagues, how on earth then can it be justified to sell one single arm, weapon or F-35 component to the very country and regime that is committing that moral outrage, that horrifying situation, that genocide?
Neil Bibby.
I thank Mr Youssef for that intervention, and I respect his passion and his campaigning on this issue. The UK Government, he'll be aware, has restricted arms sales. We have called for the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise to look at what we can do in a Scottish context, and it does need to be under constant review, and we do need to take all the action that we can take to stop these crimes from happening, because, as Mr Youssef will be aware, the killing is still ongoing and the killing needs to stop. And while there needs to be accountability, our priority must be to call for an end to those crimes now, to stop the killings with the bullets and bombs, and the killings by the barriers that prevent food getting to children's mouths and medicines to people's wounds. In biblical times, famine was seen as a matter of weather or the will of God. Today, the famine in Gaza is man-made on the edict of Benjamin Netanyahu. It must be lifted. That is why across this chamber, with people across this land, our continent and the globe, we have called for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages and the free flow of humanitarian aid. But the question we have as Scottish parliamentarians is what we can do. The Scottish Labour Party has argued for more than half a century for a two-state solution, and I recognise other parties have long supported that too. Statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people, and alongside a wider settlement, it is the only way for a lasting peace to be secured between Israel and Palestine. I believe every member in this place wants an end to the killing and a lasting peace. We may not all agree on the appropriate time to recognise the state of Palestine, but I believe that time is now. We may also not agree on what other actions should be taken to bring about that peace, but any action needs to be effective, involve international pressure and cooperation, and be under constant review. Important actions are already being taken by the UK Government, as set out in my amendment, in relation to restoring funding for UNRWA and respecting the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice. And action is being taken by the Scottish Government too. That is welcome. While on these islands we cannot end the killing in the Gaza and the West Bank alone, we can help to make a difference by how we act and how we speak. Today, we can further help to make a difference by clearly and immediately signalling our support for the recognition of the State of Palestine. Today, let's send out a message clearly that we believe in peace, that we believe in a two-state solution. That does not mean we need to take sides other than to be on the side of those who wish to live against those who wish to take life, those who seek to make peace against those who seek conflict. Let us speak of solidarity for peace, for a ceasefire, for a two-state solution, as we have always argued. But let us argue not for division for our own ends, but for the peace, for the ends who suffer for no reason.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. I now call Patrick Harvey to speak to and to move Amendment 18686.1. Up to 4 minutes, please.
I move the amendment in my name, Presiding Officer, and I welcome this opportunity for Parliament to endorse the recognition of Palestine. It's over 50 years since the United Nations recognised the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and sovereignty. Over those 5 decades, the failure of the international community to make that right a reality is one of the greatest injustices in modern world history. And the urgency is clear for anybody who can bring themselves to look. For generations, Palestinians have endured a brutal occupation, and for almost 2 years now they've been subjected to war crimes on a grotesque scale. And the weight of legal opinion is absolutely clear. This is genocide. The recent resolution of the International Association of Genocide Scholars is one example, setting out that the actions of the Israeli government against Palestinians have included torture, arbitrary detention, sexual and reproductive violence, deliberate attacks on medical professionals, humanitarian aid workers and journalists, and the deliberate deprivation of food, water, medicine and electricity. And they also set out the very explicit statements of intent which are genocidal in nature from senior members of the Israeli government. So it's unquestionable now that to achieve justice for Palestine, action must be taken. And there is action Scotland can take. During recess, my colleague Ross Greer wrote to the Scottish Government to set out the actions they can and should take now for boycotts, divestment and sanctions. Actions which don't rely on waiting for permission from the UK Government, such as disapplying part of the Local Government Act, allowing councils to boycott companies complicit in the occupation, calling for public pension funds to divest from complicit companies, urging businesses to cease trading with Israel, exactly as the Scottish Government did in relation to Russia, and to stop giving public monies to arms dealers who have supplied Israel. I very warmly welcome the announcement today that some of these steps will be taken. We will continue to press for others. The UK Government should do the same and can do far more. The UK talks of the right of Israel to defend itself, but says nothing about the right of Palestinians to resist occupation. And Labour's amendment for today's debate recognises some positive steps, so we won't oppose it, but it takes too much credit for half measures, and it's a reminder of just how lacking the UK Government's response has been. Respecting the ICC is an important principle, but there are those, including the Prime Minister, who have used this as an excuse for not describing the situation as genocide. Obviously, we support restoration of UNRWA funding, but arms export restrictions have been extremely limited, and the UK has continued to provide other forms of practical and political support to the Israeli government. Sanctions on Israeli ministers are welcome, but the UK hasn't taken any steps against UK citizens who have travelled to Israel, fought for the IDF, killed a few Palestinians and returned home to face no legal consequences. And calling for a ceasefire, aid, hostage release and a two-state settlement, saying this is the easy bit. But the Labour government have not used the international voice of the UK to condemn the United States and Trump's explicit proposals for ethnic cleansing. Presiding Officer, this issue does not stop with state recognition. There is further action the international community must take, including coordinated international sanctions. The world must work together to deliver what it voted for at the UN those 50 years ago, the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, national independence and sovereignty in Palestine. And the Palestinian state which emerges must have global support to rebuild what Israel's violence has destroyed and robust security guarantees against future incursion, invasion or occupation. Recognition of the state is long overdue, but it is only the first step toward justice for Palestine.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And I now call on Alex Hamilton. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm very grateful to the Scottish Government for making time for this very, very important debate. It's a debate which takes place against the backdrop of immense humanitarian suffering and our historic culpability, something I raised with the First Minister in the statement earlier. In Gaza, what families are enduring is nothing short of a catastrophe. Thousands of civilians killed, millions have been displaced, and basic necessities like food, water and medicine desperately scarce. There is a famine raging through that land. Those images of starving children should be burned into the retinas of all of our eyes. At the same time, Israeli families still wait in agony for the return of their loved ones taken hostage by Hamas terrorists in the atrocities of October 7th. We must never lose sight of either tragedy. Both demand urgent action. I echo those who say that a Palestinian life is worth as much as an Israeli life. Presiding Officer, it is incumbent on all of us in that spirit to remember, to think, to speak and to act on behalf of all those Israelis in whose name Netanyahu does not act and those Palestinians whom Hamas does not represent. The motion before us speaks to the recognition of a Palestinian state. For the Liberal Democrats, recognition is not an abstract gesture. It is a vital, practical step towards peace and towards a two-state solution that ensures dignity and security for both Palestinians and for Israelis. The Prime Minister has finally announced that the UK will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly later this month. We have heard that, unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire and allows aid into Gaza, amongst other conditions. That marks some progress. We accept that, and Liberal Democrats welcome it. But the Prime Minister can go much further. Liberal Democrats are in no doubt that the actions of the Israeli cabinet, of the IDF, are in breach of international law. We have repeatedly called on the government to go further in imposing a full arms embargo, sanctioning all members of the cabinet, including Netanyahu, who are complicit in the illegal aid blockade and the targeting of civilians, and supporting the gathering evidence for future accountability of these crimes against humanity. Presiding Officer, recognition should have happened months ago, and by doing it in the way the Prime Minister is intending to, we are treating recognition as some kind of bargaining chip. 147 of the United Nations 193 member states already recognise Palestine. Countries like France and Canada are moving in that direction too. If Britain believes in rules-based international order, and we should do, then we should be part of that majority. We should recognise Palestine immediately and in so doing give renewed momentum to the cause of peace. Recognition affirms the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, a right they have long been denied. And recognition would be more than just symbolic. It would allow full diplomatic relations, a Palestinian ambassador in London and a British ambassador in Palestine. That would help build the trust needed to advance peace. Recognition for Palestine is one of the most effective ways of disempowering Hamas as well, because it makes clear that the future of Palestine belongs not to the terrorists, but to the Democrats, to peace builders and to those committed to that two-state solution, something Hamas has no interest in. Hamas do not represent the Palestinian people. They have no genuine interest in a Palestinian state, and they have no future in the governance of Gaza or the West Bank. Recognition is not a reward for Hamas. It is a rejection of them. But recognition alone is not enough. We need urgent action to stop the humanitarian disaster we are all seeing in Gaza. That means pressing for an immediate ceasefire, ensuring aid flows freely, and the use of every diplomatic lever to secure the unconditional release of the remaining Israeli hostages. It means Britain going further than the Prime Minister's limited plan. We must end arms sales to Israel and apply targeted sanctions against members of the Israeli cabinet responsible for violations of international law. At the same time, we must work with international partners to identify and support democratic leaders of Palestine and to prepare for swift elections that can unite Gaza and the West Bank under one legitimate representative government. Only then can a Palestinian state be stable and enduring, and we must invest in that peace. The International Fund for Middle East Peace, supported by my party, is one way to bring together communities across the divide.
Mr Hamilton, you need to conclude.
The road to peace is long. It will not be easy, but recognition of a Palestinian state is an essential step along it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hamilton. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Paul McLennan to be followed by Brian Whittle. Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Saturday morning, I attended a Gaza protest event in Harrington in my constituency. Around 200 people were present. Last night, I attended an event in North Berwick, which was attended by around about 75 people. In both events, people from all backgrounds were present. They were angry, distraught and frustrated at the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And let's call this what it is. It's state-sponsored genocide. An estimated 63,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli government. This figure rises every day. I want to put on record my condemnation of Hamas actions on October 7th, 2023. We all do. Famine is being used as a weapon by Israel in this war. The facts of the famine are simple in Gaza. Palestinians can't leave. War has ended famine, and Israel has banned fishing. So practically every calorie its population eats must be brought in from outside. Israel knows how much food it is needed. It has been calibrating hunger in Gaza for decades. COGAT, the Israeli agency that still controls aid shipments to Gaza, calculated that Palestinians need an average minimum 2,279 calories per person per day, which could be provided through 1.836 kilograms of food. Today, humanitarian organisations are asking for an even smaller amount in minimum ration to keep people alive, 62,000 metric tonnes of dry and canned food to meet basic needs for 2.1 million people each month, or around about 1 kilogram of food per person per day. Gaza has slid into famine this summer. Israeli officials have vigorously denied the existence of mass starvation, claimed without evidence that food has been stolen or hoarded, or blamed hunger on UN distribution failures, sharing pictures of aid pallets awaiting collection inside the border. Data compiled and published by Israel's own government makes clear that it has been starving Gaza. Between March and June, Israel allowed just 56,000 tonnes of food to enter Gaza. COGAT records show less than a quarter of Gaza's minimum needs for that period are being provided. UN-backed food security experts recently said a worst-case scenario of famine is now unfolding in Gaza. Food deliveries, and I quote, are at a scale far below what is needed, amid drastic restrictions on the entry of supplies. In response, Netanyahu has promised only minimal extra aid. The number of food trucks entering the territory has risen, but is still well below the minimum needed to feed Palestinians there, much less reverse a famine.
Gaza's Ministry of Health says that more than 15,000 of the 60,000 Palestinians killed are children. Israel says that it seeks to minimise harm to civilians. The children of Gaza have the same rights as children anywhere: to water, to food, to shelter, to education, to play, to hope, to joy, and most importantly, to life. We've seen hospitals bombed and described as mistakes. We've seen journalists killed, again described as mistakes. Since October 2023, many hospitals and healthcare facilities in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed by Israeli strikes and military operations. According to a May 2025 report from the World Health Organization, 94% of Gaza's 36 hospitals have been damaged or destroyed. Attacking hospitals, medical staff and the sick is considered a war crime under the 1949 Geneva War Conventions, which Israel has signed. Attacking hospitals in Gaza have also drawn condemnation from the UN, the World Health Organization and other international bodies. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, this is a state-sponsored genocide. I welcome the commitment to recognising Palestine. The Scottish Government also needs to support a total boycott of Israeli goods, and it needs to support and pressure the UK Government to impose sanctions on the State of Israel, not just on selected officials, but on the State of Israel, and of course a complete ban on arms sales to Israel. This genocide needs to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McLennan. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by George Adam. Mr Whittle.
Presiding Officer, I have said in this chamber before that if we take away the issues that we create to divide us, colour, creed, religion, sexual orientation, people the world over are the same. We want the same basic things. We want a happy childhood, we want to spend time with friends, we want a good education, we want to be immersed in our community, we want a decent living, we want to meet somebody, we want to have a family, we want to live in peace without fear. And we all grieve loss. However, it is those who propose to exert power, ideology and control that create division, hatred and violence. Today we are debating the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and it is a humanitarian crisis. But in recent times, we could be talking of atrocities in Rwanda, in Mariupol, in Srebrenica and Aleppo, in Bosnia and Sudan, in Syria and Ukraine and Afghanistan. And it's always in these conflicts, it is the civilians who bear the brunt of politicians and religious leaders' misplaced ideology. On October the 7th, 2023, Hamas fighters launched their assault on Israel, indiscriminately killing 1,200 Israelis in the most brutal and sickening ways. I was on a call with other MSPs, some of who are in the chamber today, when we were unexpectedly shown footage from the body cams taken from the terrorists. Now, I know I wasn't the only one unprepared for the level of brutality heaped upon the most innocent of people, and I can't ever unsee that. And what about the footage of those terrorists beating and abusing that young German woman, the only woman, incidentally, seen in all of that coverage? She died the most horrendous death. The 251 hostages taken by Hamas as bargaining chips and human shields against every humanitarian law you may wish to mention. We must never lose sight of that, and under no circumstances can Hamas in any way profit from their actions or be held to account. Nor can the Houthis or Hezbollah or the Iranian government, for that matter. They have all stated categorically that they wish the purging of all Israelis, the very definition of genocide. I will.
Ivan McKee.
We all share the members' reflections on the events of October the 7th, and the First Minister has been very clear about that in his statement. But does the member believe that that justifies genocide by the Israeli government?
Brian Whittle.
The member preempts what I was just about to say. I think the world, Presiding Officer, was outraged at that atrocity and most supported Israel's right to defend itself. After all, the safety of a country and its people is the first duty of any government. And acknowledging their right to attempt to retrieve their citizens and supporting their right to defend themselves, the world asked for restraint. We asked for the Israeli government to protect the innocent. Netanyahu has pursued a war that in no way protects the citizens of Gaza. Hamas may have committed the most brutal of atrocities, but one atrocity does not justify another, and Netanyahu must be held to account. But as I raised with the First Minister, what I can't get my head around is why are supplies not getting through to the people who desperately need them. There is no shortage, after all. Both sides may blame each other, and there is no doubt in my mind that Hamas are intercepting supplies where they can and diverting them, because their actions, we can safely surmise, they care little for the Palestinian people.
The member is concluding.
My question would be, where are the UN in all of this? It cannot be out with their ability to ensure supplies get to where they are needed. They have shown themselves to be toothless and useless. What I say here is that Netanyahu is not Israel and Hamas is not Palestine. Both civilian populations have spoken out against their respective leaders. To close, I do not excuse the actions that have been taken, nor do I condone the choices that have been made. But there can be no lasting peace until both sides are willing to face up to the consequences of their actions and accept that neither side has a monopoly on the moral high ground. And while neither the Israeli government nor Hamas can claim to be innocent victims, their choices have created many among their citizens. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I would remind members that backbench speeches are up to 4 minutes. I call George Adam to be followed by Katie Clark. Mr Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, when you were having this debate and making this speech, it's a difficult and emotional speech for me. I'm an emotional person, as we all know, and my first thoughts were to go down that route. But after listening to Jackson Carlaw and listening to how he put his point of view across, I disagreed with much of what he said, but I'm glad it was Jackson Carlaw for the Conservatives that was bringing forward that point of view, because I don't think it would have been handled as well with any of your other colleagues. But I'm aware how difficult peace in the Middle East is. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and I also believe that Scotland's voice has to be heard in this. It's right that Scotland's Parliament should discuss this issue. There's also the inhumanity of what Hamas did in October 2023 to take into account. However, Presiding Officer, there comes a time, regardless of your own views, regardless of your politics, when you say enough is enough. This genocide in Gaza has to end. Earlier today, I mentioned the targeting of 247 journalists during this conflict, and we must understand how wrong this is. Presiding Officer, this debate is not just politics for me. The plight of the people of Palestine has been a major issue for me for a very long time. I've been demonstrating in the streets for Palestine for decades, and I remember taking my children to demonstrations when they were young. Jessica and James loved the colour of the spectacle, but they grew up with the chance for justice in their ears, flags in their hands, and understanding that silence in the face of injustice is never an option. Now they've got their own children, and yet we are still shouting, still marching, and still demanding the very same things. Presiding Officer, over 63,000 people, women, men, children, gone, wiped out by bombs, bullets, and now by hunger. Families slaughtered while queuing for food. Presiding Officer, let me say that again. Families slaughtered while queuing for food. Parents in Gaza have been forced to choose between their children starving to death or being shot trying to find a loaf of bread. That's not defence, that's barbarity. In Paisley, through Paisley for Palestine, they have kept the struggle alive in our community. They've marched, they've held vigils, they've stood shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinian people. One of the most powerful moments was when they did a presentation of Gaza's Doctors Under Attack. That film lays it bare. Doctors, the very people trying to save lives, being deliberately targeted. That's not random. That's a systematic attack on the professional classes of Palestine, because if you kill the doctors, the teachers, the lawyers, then you make statehood harder. But even worse, you crush hope itself. And that, colleagues, is unforgivable. That's why recognition of Palestine is so important. It's not a gift to be handed out. It must be recognition that is unconditional and irreversible. It must come with consequences for those who have continued this horror. More than 140 countries, Presiding Officer, including Ireland, Norway, Spain and Slovenia, have recognised Palestine, yet the UK still drags its feet. Keir Starmer talks about recognition, then ties it to conditions dictated by the very state starving children in Gaza. That's shameful and that's weak. Presiding Officer,
over 63,000 lives have been lost. Women, children, starved, bombed and buried while the world looks on. Recognition of Palestine is not charity, it's justice. Ceasefire now, stop the arms sales and recognise Palestine as a state unconditionally and irreversibly. No more excuses, no more delays. Palestine must be free and Scotland stands with them.
Thank you, Mr Adam. I now call Casey Clark to be followed by Bill Kidd. Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome that this motion has been brought by the Scottish Government, that this debate is taking place in government time, and a statement from the First Minister. I appreciate there are those who say that this Parliament should not be debating international issues, but I believe that it is right that we're having this debate as it affects all of us, our security, and we cannot stay silent as we watch the carnage and the multiple breaches of international law. The main argument against the Scottish Government's position seems to be that now is not the time. But given the slaughter that we've all seen, now is the time. And in fact, we should have recognised Palestine many years ago. The UK Parliament voted in favour of recognition of the Palestinian state in 2014 in a non-binding vote. But successive UK governments have failed to recognise Palestine. As the Cabinet Secretary and Alex Cole-Hamilton said, the state of Palestine has been recognised by 147 of the 193 member states of the UN, and it has been a non-member observer state since 2012. As Anna Sarwar said earlier, recently, France, Australia, Canada and the UK stated their intention to recognise Palestine by September 2025, this month. This debate is therefore timely, and I urge the UK Government to recognise the state of Palestine without condition. The backdrop, of course, is the extensive media coverage of human suffering, the mutilation and slaughter of children, the levelling of Gaza and destruction of infrastructure, starvation, famine and a blockade. Nobody can say they are not aware of the human misery. Since the horrific events of 7 October 2023, there have been at least 20 UN votes expressing concerns and condemnation of Israel's actions, and for a ceasefire and for self-determination of the Palestinian people. But Israel is not listening. Israel annexed land by force in 1948 and 1967. Illegal Israeli settlements have been built on Palestinian land since 1967, and the Israeli state has a formal system of legalised discrimination against Palestinian people. Over the last 2 years, there have been some of the highest known death tolls amongst journalists, health and humanitarian workers and UN staff. Hundreds of Palestinians have been detained and subject to arbitrary detention in the West Bank. Children in Gaza have faced the brunt of the war. Thousands of children have been killed and many more are living with life-changing injuries. There are verified reports of children dying from starvation and disease. I say to this Parliament today, any plan for peace must include Palestinian voices. I hope the political groupings come together. It would be disappointing if the vote today is not unanimous. The Scottish Parliament must support the Palestinians and must support recognition today.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call Bill Kidd to be followed by Hamza Youssef. Mr Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I wholeheartedly voice my support for today's motion, while at the same time rejecting those voices that would seek to silence Scotland's right to speak on such important issues. Such voices echo hollow and hypocrisy. On the one hand, calling for the vocal condemnation of the atrocities of 7 October 2023, a condemnation that I have repeatedly made and do so again today, while on the other hand they call for silence on the atrocities we have witnessed since. I agree with the sentiment that words alone are no longer enough, and I believe that almost 2 years on it is indeed time for action. The UK Government must, without delay, put its words into practice and recognise the state of Palestine. Despite some opinions to the contrary, I believe and I hope that Scotland can play a meaningful role in furthering efforts to achieve a lasting and just peace between Palestinians and Israelis. Only this Monday, as part of the Scotland Forum 2025, which promotes international cooperation and understanding, Scotland welcomed elected representatives from across the Nordic nations. We gave them the time, the space and the opportunity to discuss and agree upon a joint position on the question of Israel and Palestine. The resulting Nordic Declaration on Israel and Palestine, adopted in Edinburgh this week, calls upon all governments to recognise the state of Palestine. This historic declaration, the first joint declaration between the Nordic states, will, I understand, be published this week and be open for all parliamentarians to support. I will happily share it with colleagues across this chamber. The declaration also calls for the restoration of the two-state solution to the centre of the international agenda. The two-state solution is not only central to, but essential to a just peace for all parties, not only for Palestinians, but also for Israelis. Yet I feel it is much misunderstood in today's world. Many see it as simply entrenching division through the creation of hard borders between two nations. Nothing could be further from the truth. The proposal envisages an interim period during which negotiations on final status would take place. At that point, there would be no hard borders, but instead a joint administrative body, something more akin, in my mind, to a confederation of cooperation and shared interests. So let's be clear. The proposal and its specifics have already been comprehensively explored and documented. This is not an embryonic idea. It is ready for implementation down to the smallest of details. It leaves us with a two-state solution. And that brings me to what I believe is central and recurring theme in this debate: education. If we are to form opinions and make informed decisions, education is key. Too often young people, and indeed many of us, including Israelis and Palestinians, feel helpless, believing the situation to be intractable. This leads to hopelessness, when in fact there is a justified hope. I understand that steps here in Scotland to provide schools with materials on the wider content of the situation have been stalled, and I would urge the Cabinet Secretary and indeed the Scottish Government to take steps to remedy this impasse and to inform and offer hope to our young people. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, action must now be taken. I urge the UK Government to follow through on its promises, and I believe that Scotland can play our important role by facilitating dialogue, bringing together diverse voices and providing the space for them to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I now call Hamza Youssef to be followed by Cara Mockin. Mr Youssef.
Never again. These are the words we repeat every single year when we attend Holocaust Memorial Day. We rightly gather and promise to honour the memories of the 6 million Jews and all of those killed during the evil of the Holocaust. Never again, we say. I'm not sure if in the annals of human history we've ever told ourselves a bigger lie. Try telling the parents of 17,000 children murdered in Gaza, never again. Look into the eyes of tens of thousands of children who have become orphans and tell them that we really meant it when we said never again. Hospital workers, journalists, aid workers, all massacred with absolute impunity, tell their families never again. So awful is the genocide that we are witnessing. We're having to create new lexicon just to describe the horrors that we are witnessing. Dr. Tanya Haj Hassan, a Canadian paediatrician who's worked in Gaza, tells us that doctors had to create a new abbreviation for the children they were treating. WCNSF wounded child, no surviving family. What has become of us that we can allow ourselves to be so divided by the geopolitics when a massacre of tens of thousands of children is happening in front of our very eyes and the world does virtually nothing about it? Shame on us. Gaza is the cemetery upon which our collective humanity has died. Presiding Officer, we should be in no doubt about what we're witnessing. It is a genocide. This is the opinion of the world leading authority on genocide, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, who have declared that Israel's conduct meets the legal definition of genocide. They're not the only ones, of course. Amnesty International, MSF, Oxfam, Israeli human rights organisations such as B'Tselem, and many more voices of authority tell us that genocide is taking place in Gaza. Predictably, one of the most vocal voices that opposes that suggestion is the very man that's wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Presiding Officer, it's been to my astonishment over the last 48 hours that some members in this chamber are of the view that we should not be having this debate in our nation's parliament. It was never, by the way, an argument they made when we debated Ukraine, of course, and I do wonder why Palestinian lives matter less. They've said in their arguments in the last couple of days that foreign affairs are reserved to the government in London. To them I ask, is your compassion reserved? Is your humanity reserved? We have an absolute obligation in this place to tell the stories of those who do not have the privilege of platform that we have. And perhaps in that vein, let me end by telling the Chamber about my wife's cousin, Sally. She's in Gaza with her husband and 4 children. And as I tell her story, I want you to think of your children, of your niece, your nephew, your grandchild. Sally, her husband and 4 children are being starved. When Sally hugs her children, instead of feeling a warm embrace, she feels instead their spine, their ribs protruding through their skin. They are becoming quite literally emaciated in her arms. And while they cry through the pain of not eating or drinking, she has to try to comfort them while starvation grips her body. Now imagine that was your child. Imagine your child suffering the catastrophic effects of a man-made famine while thousands of tons of food was simply across the border and you could do nothing about it. As the author Omar El-Akkad wrote, one day everybody will have been against this. So I urge members across the chamber not to wait until that day, but to examine our conscience and ensure when our children ask us, what did we do when a genocide was occurring? Then at the very least, Presiding Officer, we can say we were on the right side of history.
Thank you, Mr Youssef. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by John Mason. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank the Government for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I said in June in a previous debate, we need more serious discussion of our country's role in these conflicts and how we can alter our actions to limit the likelihood of war. But let's be honest, this has gone far beyond war. It is outright aggression on an entire population of people who have been bombarded with bombs in what, let us be frank, is a planned and targeted operation. Netanyahu's regime seeks to cleanse Gaza of its people, and there must be consequences. We cannot stand by. This chamber needs to challenge this, and I am glad the Government have brought this debate to the chamber today in government time. I welcome the opportunity to speak to the motion and the amendments. It is our duty to speak out, expose what is happening, and hope it ultimately makes some difference to those suffering an unimaginable life. I receive constituent correspondence every single day, in every form you can imagine, about this issue. Scots are disgusted by what they are seeing, and they only see a fraction of what has gone on. We can be sure of this, as journalists have been stopped from entering the besieged strip, and those already there have faced starvation, severe malnutrition, deliberate targeting and ultimately death. A sombre thought about brave people who merely seek to tell the truth to the rest of the world. I believe it is my duty to be clear about these crimes and to push all governments to take action so that those who elected me know their voice is being heard in the Scottish Parliament. Our constituents expect governments to take action, peaceful action which creates consequences for this regime. Failure to act makes us complicit, and it is to my eternal shame that many people in positions of power have been slow to act and taken a route of simply saying as little as possible. I am well aware of just how impotent we are to stop the genocide stop this genocide as MSPs, but that should not mean we fail to use every ounce of influence we have to make it clear that these atrocities are not in our name. I support the actions of the UK Government laid out in the Scottish Labour Amendment. I want the UK Government to be robust in its approach, and I will continue to lobby them, as many with my own party and others do, to urge them to do more. A Palestinian state must be recognised without condition. In Scotland, we need to be assured that no public money is reaching arms parts that may reach Gaza, and the Scottish Government must continue to track that money, and I welcome the statement from the First Minister today. To close, Presiding Officer, we must use every opportunity to strive for peace, and that can only hope to be achieved once Palestine has the same recognition all sovereign states should have. Palestinians have the right to statehood, to a life free from fear, but at the moment many simply need food and clean water. What does that say about humanity? There is no war left to fight. Gaza is destroyed. The West Bank has once again been turned into an open-air prison. All of us have seen the images of babies and mothers emaciated and on the brink of death. How much longer must this go on? History has its eyes on us. This conflict must end, and we must all play our part in ensuring this happens now. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mockin. And I call John Mason. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much. War is seldom the best way of solving problems, and there have undoubtedly been far too many deaths in all three of the current major conflicts in Ukraine, in Sudan and in Gaza. However, to say that any of these three amounts to genocide, I consider as a step too far and does not help resolve the present situation. Apart from anything else, genocide requires intent, and I do not see evidence of intent on Israel's part to destroy the population of Gaza. Where we do see intent to commit genocide is when people use phrases like "from the river to the sea," which implies genocide with the removal of all Jews from Israel. What I think we do need is a longer-term plan, and we need peacemakers. It seems to me that if we could get all parties to agree on a longer-term plan, even if only in broad outline, be that a two-state solution or something else. No, I'm sorry, I've only got 4 minutes. Be that a two-state solution or something else, then it might be easier to achieve short-term improvements, such as the release of the hostages and a ceasefire. Essential to this is that all parties must accept each other's right to exist, and that includes Iran and Hamas, or any replacement for Hamas that Iran puts in place, recognising Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. The UN is often known for peacekeeping, with, I fear, mixed success historically. However, what we are needing to see now is peacemakers rather than peacekeepers. We desperately need international statesmen like former President Jimmy Carter, who would be respected by all parties and who might seek common ground and a space for compromise. That is the role I would like to see the UK or Scotland playing. We have plenty of people cheering on either side, and we do not really need any more of that. And Norway has shown in the past what could be done by even a small country by way of moving negotiations along. The present Israeli government faces considerable opposition within Israel, not least from those who want the hostages released, and they see no real progress in that regard. I do not believe Israel can actually defeat Hamas, and even if they did, a new group backed by Iran under a new name would likely arise. I know that the situation in Northern Ireland was different. However, it showed us that however much you detest the other side, eventually you need to hold talks and negotiate. And sadly, I fear that Israel is steadily losing friends the longer this one-sided war goes on, while opposition to Israel is strengthening in Gaza, Palestine and beyond. At the Building Bridges with Israel cross-party group and elsewhere, I have asked representatives of the Israeli embassy what the aim of the Israeli government is in this conflict, but I have never had a clear answer. What I do think we all need to be doing is ensuring that we judge Israel by the same standards that we apply to other countries around the world, where we see horrendous abuse of minorities and others, by a variety of states like Afghanistan with women, China with Tibetans, Uyghur, Christians, Falun Gong, Myanmar with Muslims, and North Korea with any religious group. However, it does seem that some people hold Israel to a different standard, potentially because they are the only Jewish state. I think we have to be very careful about doing this, as both Europe and the Arab world have a long history of treating Jews as second-class citizens. We need to be careful not to repeat these historical injustices. The Scottish Government motion seeks immediate recognition of Palestine as a state. I fear that that has no real meaning in practice and does not really move us forward. However, I still think that a two-state solution is probably the best solution we can aim for. Therefore, let us see increased medical and other aid getting into Gaza, but primarily let us see both the UK and Scotland doing more to encourage, promote and help make peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mason. We now move to closing speeches, and I call on Maggie Chapman to close on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This afternoon's debate has not simply been a question of foreign policy, but it is to confront a question of humanity. In Gaza, tens of thousands of children, women and men have been murdered. Whole families erased. Hospitals, schools, places of worship reduced to rubble. A people systematically starved, displaced, blockaded, bombarded, subjected to collective punishment. This is not an accident of war. This is not a tragic misfortune. This is the deliberate machinery of genocide. And Scotland, whether we wish it or not, is entangled in that machinery. At least £8 million of public money has gone from Scottish enterprise into the hands of arms manufacturers, Leonardo, Raytheon and others, merchants of death that have supplied weapons and equipment used in Israel's assault on Gaza. Not a single one of them has failed the so-called human rights due diligence test. That is a damning indictment on a system that pretends neutrality while enabling atrocity. Let us be clear, we cannot wash our hands of this. Every pound of public money that supports these firms is a pound complicit in the death of a child in Gaza. Every political equivocation, every refusal to name apartheid and genocide for what they are, is complicity. So I welcome the First Minister's statement earlier today, but we must go further. This Parliament must find the courage that too many governments across the global north have lacked. We must not avert our eyes. We must not let the words catch in our throats. Apartheid, genocide. These are not rhetorical flourishes. They are legal and moral realities. We must also recognise the decades of injustice the Palestinians have faced. The recent famine, highlighted by Paul McLennan, is only the latest atrocity inflicted on a people by the Israeli state. They have suffered illegal settlements, the silencing of their politicians and journalists, the constraint of their rights, as we've heard this afternoon, for decades. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who knew apartheid in its most despicable forms, told us plainly, and I quote, "Those who continue to do business with Israel are contributing to the perpetuation of a profoundly unjust status quo." Jimmy Carter told us nearly 20 years ago that apartheid exists in Palestine in its most despicable form. They were not afraid to speak the truth. Neither should we be. George Adams said, "Silence in the face of injustice is not an option." Absolutely true. But that truth, and the truth that Tutu and Carter spoke, demands action. Not only recognition of the state of Palestine, though that is a necessary and urgent step, but real solidarity. That means not normalising a genocidal state. It means boycott, divestment, sanctions. the very tools that helped topple apartheid South Africa, the very tools that can, once again, be the instruments of justice. Because recognition without action is hollow. Words without consequences are just another betrayal. Think, colleagues, of one family in Gaza, or what used to be a family. A mother walking back through the ruins after a temporary ceasefire. She doesn't search for her home. It is gone, as is her husband. She searches instead only for the bodies of her children. That is the scale of this horror. That is what our silence, our complicity sustains. That is why people gather in Aberdeen and Dundee, in villages, towns and cities across the world. They gather in protest, not out of hate, but out of love. Love for justice, love for peace, love for life itself. Presiding Officer, we are here for accountability, for integrity, for justice, for peace. We are here for Palestine. And today I call on this Parliament to not only recognise the state of Palestine, but to stand where history demands we stand, against apartheid, against genocide, and with the global movement of boycott, divestment and sanctions. Because if we fail to act, then all of our words, all of our debates will be nothing more than whispers over graves.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call on Polly McNeill to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 6 minutes, please.
A mere walk 12 kilometres to a food distribution point, barefoot to get food for his family. He kissed the hand of an American soldier, thanking him for a bag of lentils. Then Israeli Defence Forces killed him right in front of the soldier, executed in broad daylight. He was 5 years old. The dignity of the Palestinians is unmatched in the world, and in the middle of acute famine, they still remain dignified and hopeful. A former Defence Special Officer resigned from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation because he said in his entire career he hadn't witnessed such brutality, the use of indiscriminate force against an unarmed population, including the use of quadcopters and AI-assisted killing. 6-year-old children in Gaza are planning their own funerals. Many are scared they won't die with their parents because they know they face death. Israel and its government have crossed a clear line into the darkest crimes. Death by deliberate starvation is a war crime. There is hardly a serious journalist now who doesn't accept that it's deliberate. Bombing hospitals and targeting doctors has become commonplace. Medical staff. Dr Hassam Abiy Safia has been held in Israeli jail, and his lawyer said that he's been tortured, and we don't know why. 200 journalists have been killed trying to hold Israel to account. Israel has gone to extreme lengths to prevent the world witnessing its genocide and committing multiple war crimes. And the famine is the ugliest aspect, but at least permanent damage to the population, to the health of the population, because we've perhaps reached the point of no return. Back-to-back strikes on NASA hospitals caused outrage because journalists were murdered because they found a spot on the rooftop of the hospital that had a good internet connection. Evidence shows that there were missiles directed at that spot, and a double-tap hit, which is known by those in the military to mean that you fool the victim into thinking they survived the hit, only to have a bigger hit thereafter. Israel is not held to a higher standard. Israel is held to the standards of international law, and all of these things are breaches of international law. It's not a war. It is clear it's a deliberate plan to obliterate the Gaza Strip of its inhabitants, or either kill or force them to flee. The Israeli cabinet does not equate Palestinian lives to Jewish lives, openly stating their genocidal intentions. And if you've been reading this closely, you will see that even the chief of the IDF is saying to Netanyahu, we cannot do this. I mean, there are voices within the army actually trying to argue with Netanyahu, and lots of Israeli voices on their own streets saying this does not represent the Israel that they fought for. And that is the most important thing about the question of Israel's future. Humza Yousaf is quite right to talk about the impunity which Israel has been allowed in this world since the occupation started in 1967. No one really has been willing to hold Israel to account for their occupation. They are acting in contravention of international law by occupying the West Bank and putting the Gaza Strip under siege for 18 years. I have to say that if you've been also paying attention to what's happening in the West Bank, Israel's administration has made it a lawless state. I mentioned earlier to the Minister that our Hathleen is known by many people who go to Hebron because he's the one that shows people around and what Hebron is really like under occupation. Shot dead in his own land, and there'll be no accountability for this. Like Katie Clark and Neil Bibby and Carol Mockin and others, I actually believe that we owe the Palestinian people nothing less than the immediate recognition of their sovereign state, and without any conditions whatsoever. We must give the Palestinians the dignity that they deserve, to be full members of the United Nations, and I dearly hope that there can be unanimity on this tonight. I think the Scottish Parliament speaking with one voice on recognition is a very, very powerful thing, because like many other speakers, I know most of us who believe and have passionately believed that peace can only come about for Israel and for Palestinians until we settle this question. The whole region depends on settling this question, and I hope that we can ensure that the occupation comes to an end. There must be consequences for the State of Israel, and some it has already faced: suspension of trade negotiations, banning of goods imported from illegal settlements, which I think has actually been a policy for quite a long time. And actually, I think the Scottish Government statement is something I broadly support. I think it's really, really good. Nothing can be off the table to prevent the genocide, to bring about compliance of international law. Patrick Harvey, in a good speech, said that the world must work together, and I don't think there's ever been a truer word. If we have to make up for the feelings that the world has made happen for the Palestinian people, then we must ensure that whatever action that we take is targeted to ensure that we can actually do something about the genocide and bring an end to the occupation. And I do actually believe the UK Government should go further, and I believe in that. Close, Presiding Officer, and saying I actually do believe in the brave people within Israel itself who are marching and challenging their own government also need to be recognised in this debate. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, please, please, let this Parliament speak with one voice tonight. Let this Parliament show that Scotland and all its parties believe in justice for the Palestinians, and that we actually really believe that peace can only come about if we add our voices to all the other 147 countries now, isolating some of the big powers. I actually think will be a very powerful thing.
Thank you, Ms McNeill. And I now call on Jackson Carlisle to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I begin with the powerful speech from Hamza Yousaf? And can I say that in all the years I think we've served together in this Parliament, we've always engaged together with a mutual respect, and I hope in a way that actually is constructive in the conversations we have, irrespective of whether we agree or disagree. But I think he was right. He said never again. And in Holocaust Memorial Day speeches that I've moved in this chamber, I've said it's a conceit to say never again. Because in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, Srebrenica, genocides have been a permanent way of the world ever since the Holocaust. And it is a failure of the international community sometimes to recognise and to put in place the structures that would actually effectively intervene and deal with these matters much earlier than it has been seen to do. And I'd also say to Hamza Yousaf that I did not in my remarks, in expressing my view, deny that there should be an opportunity for this chamber to participate in this debate. I recognise the strong feelings that have been expressed, and I think the debate, although clearly there have been speeches with which I can't agree this afternoon, has actually been held in terms which are not those that I might have feared it could have been, and I'd like to thank members for that. Alex Cole-Hamilton talked about the historic perspective in all of this. And yeah, I remember debating here in 2018 as we celebrated, or commemorated rather, the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, the whole failure of the international community over 100 years to actually grapple with and resolve the issue of the Middle East and Palestine. It was implicit in the Balfour Declaration that not only would there be a state of Israel, but there would be a state of Palestine too. And that has been a failure. And it's not been a failure that's been arrived at without effort. Lots of people have made efforts, but there has sometimes been an intransigence. And the nearest I remember we got was under President Clinton, when he produced the accords that he did, and Yasser Arafat was on the verge of potentially agreeing what would have been a settlement on which a future peace could have been built. But unfortunately, he was unable to sustain the agreements that he had potentially arrived at when he arrived back in the Middle East. And so those efforts fell apart. And really, for 30 years, we've made no progress whatsoever. Mr. Sweeney.
Paul Sweeney.
Does he recognise that a key element in the collapse of the Oslo Accords was the polarisation driven by the current Prime Minister of Israel?
I think I have just recognised that there was an intransigence on all sides to finally actually implement an agreement that would have taken matters forward. But it wasn't an intransigence from one side. It ultimately collapsed because the negotiation between the lead parties could not be supported by the communities that they represented. Mr Cole-Hamilton also said there should not be reward. But, I mean, one of the chilling things, and I want to say this, but one of the chilling things that I heard over the summer was a representative of the Palestinian people say that one of the fruits of October 7th was the decision of governments to now unconditionally recognise the state of Palestine. And that, I think, is something that is chilling, because it implies that the actions of October the 7th were justified and have brought about a successful outcome. And I think we should all be concerned by that, irrespective of the view that we might come to in today's debate. I think I need to make some progress, though, however. Neil Bibby, I want to thank him for drawing the distinction I asked for between the current administration in Israel and equating that and conflating it with the entire people of Israel, or indeed the entire Jewish community. And I've got the letter that I know that the First Minister has now received in response to the meeting that he and Mr Robertson had on Monday. And in it, there is this underlying concern that I think it will be important for us to address, that by accepting the situation now, we have not suddenly found fault with the Jewish community, and that there isn't now a need for additional security for all of them. And it's important to understand why. Because the members of my community, the Jewish community in my constituency, when I go to Yom HaShoah commemorations each year, on the screen are the names of those who were massacred in the Holocaust, belonging to almost every family in the community of Eastwood. And they live in fear of that reality as they see the prosecution of events in the Middle East. And our duty is to ensure that that community, that all our communities here in Scotland, remain safe and free and are treated fairly and with respect. First Minister.
First Minister.
I'm grateful to Mr Carroll for giving way. And let me take this opportunity to reinforce the point that I made to the representatives of the Jewish community on Monday, that they are valued members of our society, a valued community, and that their safety and their security is as important to me as is the safety and the security of any other citizen within Scotland, and we will work with them to support that security and that safety.
Jackson Carter.
The First Minister knows how much I appreciate the comments that he makes. I did take issue with one thing that Pauline McNeill said, and I understood possibly the motivation of it when she said Israel is no longer a democracy. But a key right of a democracy is the right to protest. And there have been widespread protests in Israel involving hundreds of thousands of people who are challenging the actions of the current government. I doubt anyone protesting in Gaza against Hamas has the same leniency or tolerance should they choose to do so. But also amongst those protesting are the hostages' families themselves, because they have the obvious concern that the prosecution of events in Gaza by the Netanyahu administration is not designed to see their loved ones returned alive. It's clear that that is no longer a priority of Netanyahu, and that is shameful, because this began as a conquest to get back the hostages' families who were taken, and that should be the fundamental aim of any Israeli government action.
Thank you to Jackson Carlo. The point I was making was if you shoot a Palestinian, as I mentioned earlier, and there's no trial, no accountability, then surely the member would accept that that is not in compliance with what a normal country would do in terms of holding to account criminality. And that's my concern. Does he understand where I was coming from?
I do appreciate that point, but I expect that the Netanyahu government not only will have to face the judgment of the international community, it will have to face the judgment of the people in Israel too, many of whom I think are now deeply concerned by the actions of that government, but who still nonetheless believe in their own implicit right to exist as a state. Presiding Officer, I realise I am out of time, and I just want to say that I've listened carefully to the debate this afternoon, and I've listened to the speeches that have been made. And unfortunately, I do believe that in supporting what is a motion without timing, it would be seen that I would be, and our side would be, supporting the immediate recognition of Palestine when we believe that should be in the context of a wider settlement. We won't vote against the motion this evening, but we will abstain.
Thank you, Mr Carnell. And I now call on Minister Ivan McKee to respond to the debate. Up to 9 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, it's been a powerful and sobering debate, and the contributions from across the chamber reflect the depth of concern felt in Scotland about the unfolding catastrophe in Gaza, and our shared conviction that words must be matched by action. The ICJ in January 2024 found a prima facie case that the Israeli government was committing genocide and issued provisional measures. As the First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary have stated, we have taken account of international law and the UK's international treaty obligations, which we are required to do, not least by the Ministerial Code. It is, of course, ultimately for international courts to decide if genocide has occurred, but, and this is very important, governments cannot wait until it is too late. History has taught us that hard lesson. We need to use every lever available to us, economic, humanitarian and political. Scotland is not waiting for others to lead. Alongside calling for the UK Government to act, we are taking steps to match our actions, to make sure our actions match our values. We will pause new awards of public money to arms companies whose products or services are provided to countries where there is plausible evidence of genocide being committed by that country, and that will include Israel. Defence companies seeking support from the Scottish Government will have to demonstrate their products are not involved militarily with Israel. We are instructing relevant delivery bodies where possible not to provide support facilitating trade between Scotland and Israel. And we are calling on the UK Government to go further. The suspension of new trade negotiations with Israel was a start, but it's time to withdraw from the existing UK-Israel Trade Partnership Agreement altogether, given the human rights situation in Gaza. We call for an end to all arms exports to Israel, which are being used against Palestinians in serious violation of international humanitarian law. And we're also urging the UK to follow Ireland's lead and prohibit the import of goods produced in illegal Israeli settlements. These steps symbolise our commitment in this matter, but are not just symbolic gestures. They are targeted, practical measures designed to prevent Scotland's public resources being complicit in the suffering of civilians. Regarding our humanitarian response, Scotland has a proud record of global solidarity. In Gaza, that solidarity has been put into action. We have committed £1.3 million in humanitarian aid to date, supporting UNRWA, the Disasters Emergency Committee, SCIAF and Mercy Corps. Today we go further with another £1 million in support, £400,000 to establish in the Gaza Hopes Field Readiness Hub in Dundee, unlocking $15 million for a deployable field hospital, and £600,000 to the UNOCHA-led humanitarian fund for the occupied Palestinian territories. We are also preparing to welcome up to 20 injured children from Gaza for treatment in Scottish hospitals. These children have endured unimaginable trauma. Scotland will offer them care, dignity and hope. This is what it means to be a good global citizen, not just to speak but to act. And turning to our pressures on the UK Government, Scotland is using its voice to demand accountability. We are calling on the UK Government to recognise the State of Palestine unconditionally and irreversibly as a first step to a two-state solution. Recognition is a gift, is not a gift, it is a right, and it's long overdue. The Conservative amendment says that recognition should happen at an appropriate time. This Scottish Government believes that now is an appropriate time, and indeed we are far beyond that time. For that reason, we will not supporting the Conservative amendment. We also urge the UK to join South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice and to commit to implementing any arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. And we call for sanctions on Israeli ministers complicit in illegal settlements and military actions that target civilians. Scotland will not be complicit, and we will not be silent. Presiding Officer, this debate is a test of our values. A defining tragedy of this century is occurring before our eyes. We are witnessing a humanitarian disaster of historic proportions. Over 63,000 Gazans have been killed, famine has been declared, hospitals have been bombed, journalists have been targeted, children are dying from malnutrition and contaminated water. Presiding Officer, I want to reflect on some of the comments made by colleagues in the Chamber. As always, the contributions from Polly McNeill and Humza Yousaf were significant and talk to the real impact that the tragedy is having on individuals in Gaza and, as Polly McNeill identified, within the West Bank too. And to anyone that says that if Hamas wasn't there, this wouldn't be happening, they just need to look at what's happening in the West Bank, where Hamas obviously isn't present. I want to very importantly note the near unanimity in support of the actions being proposed by the Scottish Government. I don't think a single member has spoken against those measures, and that is hugely welcome and talks to the considerable work undertaken to get us to this place with a well-crafted package of measures. And I also have to say it's a testament to the leadership of the First Minister, who's personally been hugely involved in this work over the past days and weeks. There are some specific contributions I also want to comment on. I listened with incredulity to Brian Whittle's contribution, and just to explain, the reason aid is not being provided is exclusively the fault of the Israeli government and Israeli military. This is not just a matter of fact on the ground. It is also the case that in international law it is the responsibility of the occupying power to ensure supply of essentials to the civilian population. There should be no doubt about that. And that's particularly profound where we have seen deliberate targeting and execution of aid workers on the ground by the Israeli military. I also want to comment on Jackson Carlow's contribution. To be honest, I found his summing up to be more helpful, but I also want to comment on some of the things he said in his opening speech. Humza Yousaf made the point that one of the defining characteristics of genocide is that there's never any shortage of those who deny it was happening or looked the other way at the time. And to be honest, I found Jackson Carlow's opening speech consisted of deflection, denial, obfuscation, a masterclass in whataboutery. There is no justification for genocide. The responsibility lies with the Israeli government in law and in practice. History will judge us, as it does in all genocides, on how we respond today to those events. Never again means never again for anyone, and that needs to be recognised. And I wasn't going to comment on John Mason's contribution, but I just want to give 2 points of fact. From the River to the Sea originally appeared in the 1977 manifesto of Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party. That's where that comes from. And Jimmy Carter, who he talked glowingly about, was very clear that what was happening in Israel, even back then, was apartheid. So, Presiding Officer, let me close with some wrapping up comments. We were all horrified by the attacks on Israel by Hamas in October 2023. That caused the worst loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. We must not underestimate the trauma this caused to the people of Israel and to Jews globally. Hamas, of course, must release all hostages immediately and fully engage in peace. However, the actions of the Israeli military at the behest of the Netanyahu government in Gaza has gone far beyond a legitimate response. We will not be a bystander in this crisis. To those in this crisis who are in suffering, we stand with you. We stand for a future where Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side in peace and security. Scotland's actions are not just about policy, they are about principle. We are guided by our values, compassion, justice and the belief in the equal worth of every human life. In the face of mass suffering, neutrality is not an option. We must act, and we are acting because, and I say it again, history will remember those who chose to speak and those who remained silent. Let it be said today that Scotland spoke. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on Palestine, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 18695 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out changes to business. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 18695 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 18696 in the name of Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme, and I call on the Minister to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak to the motion. The question is that motion 18696 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of business motions 18697 and 18698 on timetabling of bills at stage 1. I ask any member who wishes to speak to the motions to press their request to speak button. And I call on Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motions.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to these motions. Therefore, the question is that motions 18697 and 18698 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motions are therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and I ask Jamie Hepburn on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move motions 18699 and 18700 on approval of an SSI and 18701 on designation of a lead committee.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. And the question on these motions will be put at decision time. And there are 5 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 18686.3 in the name of Jackson Carlaw, which seeks to amend motion 18686 in the name of Angus Robertson on Palestine, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.